Greetings! Anton here with the H3VR Devlog. I have been at the Unite conference all week, so I don't have anything new in editor in-game to show you, so I thought what I would do this week is do a bit of a Q&A. I've seen a number of common questions coming up again and again, whether it's on Reddit or the Steam community forums. And instead of just, I'm still going to put them actually in like an FAQ for the site for the game, but I figured a more sort of in-depth and personal way to answer a bunch of those questions would be to do it on video. So before I get to them though, as I mentioned, I was at Unite, which is the Unity development conference that was here in LA this year, which was great because I could just wake up whenever I felt like it each day and just Uber on over, and instead of having to get up in a hotel at like 8 in the morning and actually get there on time. So but really wonderful experience. This was the first one in 3 years where I didn't give a solo talk. Instead I was on a really cathartic panel on the sort of technical challenges of VR development with some wonderful folk. Just if it'll eventually be on YouTube, but for now, if you can just imagine 5 people basically going, physics for VR is broken. That was a huge part of the panel. So, but yeah, so let's go ahead and jump into some of these common questions. I'm going to start with the ones that have short answers first, and work my way on to the ones that have longer answers. So the first one, which came up a bunch this past week, which is the meat grinder mode in the game going to be permanent, or are those holiday changes going away? Don't worry, it's permanent. It's here to stay, and there's actually a bunch of tuning that I still want to do on it. We're probably going to write a little more dialogue, do a little more recording to get some gameplay hooks in there that should be in there. I'm considering a sort of hard mode for it that will probably just have a higher density of things. I also had a couple like meat trap ideas that I just didn't have enough time to get in. So yeah, so expect that to get sort of a drip feed of content updates over the next couple month and a half or so. Yeah, I must say it's been a blast seeing. I've seen a couple full playthrough vids on YouTube of folks playing it, and of course I'm just sitting here, evil laugh glee as people are like freaking out as they're going through it. So it's been super fun to see that. All right, next super common one, which probably the most common question or comment, which is, will I eventually add your favorite firearm? And to all of those sorts of questions, I know folks love to just shout like P90 represent sort of things. I can't give you a yes or no positive answer. I've mentioned before that the priority is always a mixture of sort of what I have easy access to on hand, the few ones that I just absolutely desperately need to have now, and the ones that make sense from a systems standpoint to get working. So obviously the next big thing on that list, which people have been, yelling and wanting for a while, is a proper belt-fed machine gun. So I have the model for that now. I am still doing a bunch of experimentation on how I'm going to rig it. The most difficult thing, as you might imagine, for a belt-fed machine gun is the belt itself, as obviously just from a performance standpoint, it's not possible to draw the entire 200-round belt at once, nor is it, possible or even stable enough to do a really long joint chain with a lot of individually jointed bullets. Some of you might remember from an earlier iteration of H3, some months back, when the dynamite still had a flexible fuse, how you could whip the dynamite rapidly and the fuse would go from this long to this long suddenly. That's basically just because joints cannot keep up with that type of rapid movement. And so I've been playing around in Maya and Unity and trying to find the right approach for that, because I don't want something that's cartoony. Some people have mentioned that there's a cool belt feed what is it? Come on, brain freeze, out of ammo. But that's sort of like, it's a little stretchy, it's a little cartoony. I'm trying to make something that works, that's more tangible and solid. And so what I'm going to probably have to do is make a belt that can be in a bunch of different states. So, you know, when you initially insert the box mag, there'll just be a single bullet poking out, and you'll be able to sort of grab it and pull it out, and it'll be physics active sort of momentarily while you're affixing it to the machine gun. Then it will sort of transfer into sort of a kinematic mode that's cheap computationally when it's sort of attached to the machine gun. And then when it begins to run out, as the rounds come out of the box, I'll basically hot swap it back for a jointed physics structure for those last 6 or 7 rounds, so they can actually like flap as they're finishing feeding through the machine gun. And so that you could say, just stop there, empty it, grab that like 6 or 7 round chunk of belt and just throw it away. Because that's the most difficult thing in sort of, you know, in designing something like this, is that unlike the way firearms work in a lot of other games, I want to make sure that if there's a set of actions you could perform in real life in terms of interrupting the whole firing cycle, that you can do so and it behaves how it should when that happens. So, but I can't tell you when that's going to be ready. It's already turning into the most difficult physics thing I've tried to get working, but it's in progress. And then as for just other firearms in general, I don't know. It's at a certain point I'll get to, and I'll let everyone know when I've basically gotten all of the core firearm systems done, i.e. all the explosive stuff will be done at some point. I'll have a unified system for like an open bolt, SMG or machine gun, which a lot of the World War II weapons will need. And there will be some point in the future where I run out of all the obvious stuff, at which point I'll probably put up some votes for the community in terms of a firearm priority. But until then, I can't give you a solid yes or no as to whether anything's going to be present. So, next question, will there be multiplayer? This gets brought up all the time, and it's sometimes a little frustrating for me to deal with, because I will say why we're not getting it, and then I'll get half a dozen people who want to tell me how they would approach networking it. But there's not going to be networked multiplayer in H3. I'm not saying it would be impossible, but it's largely it's utterly infeasible for the state of where the project is at. And as I've said multiple times to folk, if it was something I wanted to do, which it isn't, it just isn't an interest of mine, it would the smartest thing to do would be to rewrite almost everything from scratch. Because just welding on multiplayer to almost any game, especially one that already has an enormous code base, is generally a disastrous idea. So, as some of you might have seen the Reddit thread, someone brought up this idea of doing sort of hot seat multiplayer or hot seat co-op, where one person's in the Vive and one person's sitting at the desk and doing something on screen. This is actually something that I've thought about a whole bunch and would love to do, some sort of asymmetric co-op where one person's in the Vive and another person's like a robot helper of some sort. But it's something that I don't want to tackle until I can migrate the game from the version of Unity that I'm currently stuck in right now for a bunch of technical reasons, which is 5.3.3, up to 5.4 or 5.5, because I have to rebuild the camera rig when I do that transition anyway. And if I'm going to be doing that, I will go ahead and add in, at that point, the support to be able to draw arbitrary views to the screen instead of just the player's view. Which should hopefully also, for those of you who stream, and especially stream with like someone helping you out like an assistant, being able to have someone piloting what is effectively a camera will be possible at that point. So just, you know, it's on my roadmap, and it's but can't promise any timelines on it, because it's held up by technical issues, and that's a whole other discussion to itself as to my Unity upgrade woes. So next question, when will there be tutorial info in-game? This is actually something I was trying to get a technical question answered at Unite. in regards to this, because at this point there's already, there's dozens of firearms in the game, and bluntly put, even just telling you what the buttons do, like, left on the touchpad moves the fire selector, is enough for someone who understands how a firearm functions to know what to do in that moment, but it realistically is not enough for someone who doesn't know how a lot of these firearms work to be able to actually load and cycle the weapon properly. And so what I've realized is going to be the likely answer for this is that using the sort of item spawner platform, my goal is to basically record in first person in the Vive sort of 2 to 3 minute videos for every single firearm and complex object in the game, and have it be so that when you're at the item spawner, you can hit a button and it will bring up and stream that video. And there were a bunch of, I spent all week asking folk what the best and sort of least likely to hang a VR app way to do that would be. And I got my answer for that. So that's something I'm going to be investigating this month, because that's a type of tutorial information that I can probably start sneaking in a bit earlier and a bit more safely, because it's way easier to sub out a video if something changes than it is to sub out a bunch of tool tips or some other sort of system that's actually embedded in the game. So I'd love to know what you folks think of that idea. I'd probably do it just a little bit themed and such, but go through all of the sort of, here's your firearm, here's the magazine, here's our operational sequence, sort of thing. It's also in many ways much easier to localize in the future. So yeah, what's next? Okay, platform stuff. I've been with it, having come out, I've been getting a flurry of emails asking whether H3 is coming to PSVR. It's not, sadly. Both the input and just the horsepower of the platform are not such that, especially with our resources, we can really bring the game over to it. Much in the same way that with the way, the Oculus Store requires games be able to work in a sort of front-facing mode, H3 is to its to its core, a 360 room scale game. To have it be anything else would require a tremendous amount of redesign. And in the case of the PSVR, I've played around with the controllers enough for it that the tracking solution just isn't really precise enough for so many of the interactions in the game. And to actually make that a quality experience would take a ton of engineering and redesign, and it's so far outside of our resources to do. So it's going to remain a Steam VR exclusive. Let's see, next question. Will there be workshop content? I get asked this a lot. In a traditional sense, no. In that I currently have no plans for custom model importation. And a lot of that has to do with just the content pipeline in Unity, custom shaders that I use, and all of the manual configuration that I have to do on a firearm that is hard working in Unity, and to actually build an external tool so that could either be parsed from a text file or some sort of external editor would be a tremendous amount of work. But on the good side of things, I am currently working on, as I've mentioned in past videos, a sort of serialized level scenario system, so that what I want to try to do is find the best of both worlds of the efficiency and sort of good performance characteristics of when I build a level in Unity, bake all the stuff that needs to be baked, like lighting and reflections and nav mesh and occlusion culling, but then give you, as the player, the opportunity to start with that template that's basically an environment with no other content in it, and be able to turn it into whatever you want. And so that's everything from being able to turn it into target sequences to a sort of scenario puzzle that has robots and turrets in it eventually, or anything in between, or just like a clubhouse for yourself. And the system that I'm basically writing is both all of the UX tools for being able to lay out those objects and name your scene and save everything, And the what will basically be done is that will then all just get baked down to a string. So it'll be basically a super lightweight level format that, based on how we end up implementing all the Steamworks stuff, you'll be able to just sort of make a level right in game and then share it with everyone. So I've gotten through some of the terrible parts of making that work, and I'm into phase 2 of the terrible parts of making that work, which is all the like UI and UX design, which makes me want to just blow my brains out. But it needs to happen. I'm hoping that this month I'm going to probably have 1 or 2 prototypes of how that system will work. So basically the idea is that you'll load into this sort of lobby scene from the main menu, where you'll have this menu in front of you where you can either create a new level from a template or load an existing one that's stored locally. And then from there, you'll sort of load into it in what's called edit mode, where you can sort of move around freely, you can grab objects, drag them around, lock them, configure them, and then you can save those changes and jump into play mode. Almost like a super, super, super light version of actually using Unity. Or from the main menu, you can just jump right into play mode on a level 2 play scenario. So, but that's the plan. That's what I'm working on. So far, nothing's exploded in my face, so it's going quite well. So, and hopefully that will be sufficient for those of you who really want to like modify the game and bring something of your own into it. But for those of you who are 3D modelers, I want to say, who are like, I love making guns, or prop models or things like that. I can take model donations for the game. It's something where I have to do all of the finishing and repivoting and material work in importation. But it totally is something I can do if you're interested in it. And if that's something that strikes your fancy and you have background in making proper PBR efficient real-time assets, just ping me on Reddit and I can give you a more detailed specification breakdown on the way I need assets structured to be able to accept them into the game. So yeah. And then the last question, this is sort of an open-ended one, but I've gotten asked this enough recently that I figured it'd be good to sort of ramble on, which is, for those, I've gotten asked by folks who are Unity devs or still fairly new to Unity, who want to get into VR development, where they should really start and what they need to be good at to be able to really jump into doing VR development. And this is something that's been on my mind a ton, especially because, I was an educator in the past. I've done a lot of workshops. I've done private training, and doing VR dev is it's interesting in that it demands that you have a deeper knowledge of a few of Unity's subsystems to a far greater degree than doing your sort of average indie game, in part because performance is such a huge concern. And so I say in general that there are a couple sort of core things for someone who's starting out, that if you're looking where to focus your learning energies and your practice to be able to do VR development that scales, are learning the physics system in and out, and not just necessarily the stuff that's like in the manual or the documentation for Unity, but in doing performance testing, because there's a whole bunch of stuff with physics systems that when you just are doing one of something is not really a high performance cost. But when you all of a sudden start doing as many of them as you might do it in an average game, can utterly destroy frame rate. All of the physics callbacks in Unity, on trigger enter, on trigger stay, on trigger exit. The collision ones especially. On collision stay should basically never be used unless you are 100% certain you require it, because all of those methods generate garbage, which will cause a garbage collector spike later, and they're called through send message, which is like 100 times slower than a native method call. So if you all of a sudden have, this happened to me like I think week 2 in H3, where I had a whole bunch of those collision and trigger callbacks on every one of my bullet casing. And everything ran fine until I created a pile of about 12 of them. And then the performance impact was so serious that it kicked me out of VR. Because it was like each one was colliding with 3 or 4 other bullets every single frame, and all of those methods were being called that many times. And so so a lot of that stuff can get suddenly very, very expensive. It's also important to learn how to do all of your types of sweep testing, so ray casts and capsule casts and sphere casts as in as restrained a way as possible. So there are many situations where you can do a whole bunch of intelligent sort of analysis of what you're trying to do to, say, not have a ray cast go out to infinity, but if you only need to check for things that are 3 meters away, only have that go 3 meters, because all of that stuff adds up. And then most importantly, with physics stuff, making sure that things that don't need to collide never collide. So if you aren't already using the physics collision layer matrix and putting things intelligently onto separate layers, you should definitely do that. If you were to take a peek at mine in H3, you'd see that something like 90% of the checkboxes are unchecked. And that's because efficient collisions come from and this is a general optimization thing. In general, it's always easier to just not do things when they're not needed than doing too many things and trying to make them cheaper. And so many VR optimizations follow that philosophy. Only do the work you need to do. And then on top of that, and this is something, especially those of you who want to be making sort of either sandbox games where the user can do all sorts of crazy stuff that you might not predict, or sort of pyrotechnic or explosive games, is learning how to, if you're going to have moments of computation or events where lots of things can suddenly happen, like a grenade exploding, knowing how to structure code in a way that you can spread that calculation across many frames. So a simple example of this is the grenade that I just added last update. I wanted that to have real shrapnel that comes out of it, a cloud of it, which means hundreds of pieces of shrapnel. And now those pieces of shrapnel are using the bullet model in H3, which isn't just ray casting, isn't just sort of moving an imaginary bullet through the world, but it's doing a whole bunch of other computation too that isn't cheap. I'm doing, drag simulation and tumbling, and those ray casts are comparing themselves against a pretty complex collision environment. And so suddenly creating 240 bullets in one frame is not going to make the CPU happy. And especially because I eventually want to say have a weapon that could fire explosives pretty rapidly, that system needs to not suddenly obliterate, hit the CPU too hard at once. And so in the case of those explosions, I have rate limiters that I can set where it's like, there's going to be 240 pieces of shrapnel, but instead of them all being spawned on the frame the explosion starts, it does X number of them per frame for a certain number of frames. I do this a lot with really expensive things as well, where I have various forms of either rate limiters or pass-offs, where like if there's 6 of something expensive in the scene, it only updates 1 of them per frame, and it does that automatically by keeping track of how many of them exist. If you can get into these habits early, and they're a pain because it requires more code infrastructure to do, it requires more planning, you will make something that is going to naturally scale better. Because what you don't want is to get into the situation where you do things a little sloppier, you do them the more expensive way, you're 2 months, you're 4 months into the VR game that you're making, and then you've added a new feature, a new level, and all of a sudden things are running terribly because you didn't pre-plan a bunch of that infrastructure. So the more that you can prefigure that and do things as leanly, as efficiently, and as I would say mutably in how you optimize, the better. Seriously, when it comes to VR work, there's no such thing as premature optimization. We are all racing to get so much done in 11 milliseconds. So yeah, so I know a lot of that probably sounds scary, especially to those of you who are just starting out with development. I know they did. Frankly put, they intimidated me. I don't have a formal computer science background or anything like that. I have an arts, degree, and so all of the programming stuff that I know how to do is self-taught and learned with the the help of various mentors over the years. And how to put it, I let it intimidate me for far too many of those years to not dive in deeper, because I came from this perspective of I'm just a 3D artist and the programmer people are doing the serious stuff. I don't have the head for that. But it's about just being patient with it and doing sort of small things and being willing to iterate on your experiments, and most importantly to take the time as you're doing that learning process to get some data back about how you're doing. You're never too early in your development process, or in your learning process in Unity, to learn how to use the profiler, to actually look at what you're doing and being like, okay, what I just wrote to do this thing is taking a millisecond. Why? And learning that stuff, early, because it will inform you'll learn everything faster, you'll learn the practices faster, and you'll make VR games that don't make people sick, which is always a plus. So yeah, anywho, that's enough of that ramble for now. I could talk endlessly about that side of things, but yeah, and for those of you also who are jumping in, I definitely recommend checking out VRTK, which is a great assemblage. It's been sort of scooping up a whole bunch of different sort of starter pack stuff for a while for doing VR stuff. I've contributed a tiny bit of code to it, and is a great starting place. Also, Newton VR, which was my original inspiration for the API that I wrote. Definitely check it out. There's some great community resources, and then lastly, on the where do I start? How do I VR dev? That I try to tell people as much as possible, which is, don't be intimidated to try something completely new when you're doing this from design to implementation. There are no right ways of doing any of this stuff yet. In fact, the things like the physics system are so maladapted to what we're asking of it at this point that everyone's solution for doing even as simple a thing as picking up an object in each hand and having them be able to hit each other and then being able to throw one of them are, at least to a certain degree, hacky solutions. And so if you think you have a wild and weird idea on how to do things, try it out. We are all still just stumbling around trying to figure out how this should all work. And we need more people throwing their brains at the problem space. So do so with gusto. Anywho, that's enough for this week. I'm going to go back to relaxing because I am absolutely exhausted from the crunch for Meat Grinder and then that little update after, and then immediately going to a conference. I feel like I could sleep for 2 weeks. I won't, obviously. What I really mean is I'll nap for like 3 hours and get right back to work. But at least I have that. So I hope you all have a wonderful week. There'll be some new fun stuff next week for you for what will be, I think, update 27. So I will see you then. Peace.